Hi everybody, it is very unfiltered, currently in editing mode. Jonathan here, just giving a quick intro to today's video. I just wanted to stress and tell everybody once again that I'm very pleased to say I recently got published in Cold Open Stories. My story is called The Reek of Revolution. It is around 5,000 words and it is a sci-fi flick about a bleacher, somebody who has to clean up after the dead, following a horrendous battle in the wake of a revolution. Really hope you all enjoy reading that story, and more importantly, I hope you enjoy listening to the following video. Thank you everybody so much, and a massive shout out to Cold Open Stories for the opportunity to publish with them, and for Colyn's time in the following episode. Thanks everybody. Hello everybody and welcome to this very special edition of Author's Anvil. Today I have something quite different than what I usually do compared to the rest of my videos. I have the pleasure of having my first ever guest on this channel for a little podcast, which is super exciting. It is the person who is the founder and main producer of Cold Open Stories, Colyn DeGraaff. Cold Open Stories is a fantastic publishing company where they specialise in Warhammer 40k fanfiction and general speculative fiction as well. And without too much bragging here, I'm very pleased to say that I was recently published with Cold Open Stories, and that prompted me to have a little chat with my good friend Colyn here. So Colyn, how's it going, man?
It's going well, John. Thanks for having me on, and hello to all the listeners as well. Good to have everyone joining us today.
Colyn is not only the producer of Cold Open Stories, he is a multi-specialist, a photographer, a designer, a visionary. But he's also been traveling all around the world, both personally and professional. There are so many exciting, awesome, amazing things about Colyn. But my first question to you, Colyn, is what is the most boring fact about Colyn DeGraaff?
Okay. I'll admit I don't really get out much when it comes to a lot of my life and what I do. It is very much wrapped up in, I wouldn't like to say like hustle culture, but I always have something really on the go, and that usually keeps me behind a desk working on something. Although you are right, I do get to travel personally and professionally, but I would say that outside of the creative pursuits, one trick pony. I don't know. I've really done so much to put an emphasis onto creating imaginative worlds and creating a space for authors and voice actors and actresses to be able to come together, that at the end of the day you're like, oh, so what else are you doing? I'm like, I don't know. I really like herringbone stuff that goes into on a couch. Like I am kind of turning into an old man, and I think the cardigan that I'm wearing right now is just accelerating the rapid aging of my identity. So
I do think that was a bit of a cheat there, Colyn, because that was still vaguely interesting. I always like asking that question to people now, because when you ask somebody to give a fun fact about themselves, it can very often make them clam up a bit, and there's that pressure to come up with something interesting, whereas getting people to just come up with a really boring fact just takes away that pressure, and you can get some really fun answers. In case anyone was wondering about me, the most boring fact about me is that I only like my toast lightly done with a thin scraping of butter on top.
It's good to have a preference. Yeah.
Absolutely, but now onto a more serious topic. I'd love for you to give us a small rundown, Colyn, of the origin story of Cold Open Stories. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Cold Open was only started about 5 or 6 years ago, and yet you have how much of a following?
Yeah, so the podcast side of Cold Open Stories is about 500,000 downloads at this point. The website, we're usually looking in the thousands, tens of thousands for traffic monthly, which is great. What we do is we kind of, as you'd mentioned at the top, we have a space for fan fiction, of which we have a large emphasis on the universe of Warhammer 40,000, as well as we do have our original worlds, which are, as the name suggests, original, IPs that are all of our writers still own themselves. It's just something we work with them to help them find a new audience. The impetus of where Cold Open Stories came from was back in 2019. I had a surgery that had gone quite askew, and it had left me temporarily immobile from the waist down, and there was a lot of physical rehabilitation involved. But I was spending a lot of time in bed, and during that time I had listened to quite a few podcasts, and again, you start to track what happens with 2019 going into the years that follow in the beginning of the pandemic, and I was quite solitary, quite insular, and kind of trapped. And so when it came to working on or listening to podcasts, and specifically creative fiction podcasts that weren't about like, hello listener, welcome to this anthology, because I know that there are many of those, but ones that just kind of like leapt right in and said, let's tell a story, let's have character actors, let's do that. I was like, I love that, I want to do that. And at the time, I was also, because I wasn't really mobile, was staying propped up in bed or on a couch, and I was able to hold models and figurines still, and I was able to do some painting, and with models and miniatures, that's the connection to Warhammer and being able to find a community there. But I always wanted to make sure that there was something I wanted to do with original authors and telling stories. And so it started off with me just saying, okay, I'll get a bunch of voice actors together and see what I can do and write some stories and write audio dramas, because I was bold and brazen enough to be like, I could do that. Like anyone that, sees a painting and they go, oh, I could paint that. And very quickly, learned a lot and started to surround myself with really exceptional talent in other writers and voice talent. And then that turned from, the podcast to website development, and again, creating a community for spaces for writers, readers, and listeners. And it just kept growing from there and growing from there. And then we would do, the one-off of original. And now what we have is, when we look, we have constant fast fiction writing competitions for Warhammer. We have a anthology series for original worlds. We've done some incredible work with composers, and we do our own sound design as well, which means a lot of taking a microphone out into, of all places, gyms and jungle gyms that are old and creaky and cold in the Canadian winter, and just like playing with those metals and seeing what sounds we can get, and then turning that into immersive audio. So something that isn't just like a couple bleep bloop sound effects in an audiobook, but like fully scored, full sound design, something that is a theater of the mind. And it's been super, super fulfilling and productive, and I've met some really incredible people along the way.
That's awesome, man. And it's so cool because when I worked with you guys, you have a whole team of editors and people who help you with the submissions. How did you meet all these people? Were they friends of yours already? Or...
No, like I mentioned, I didn't get out a lot. My communities have been formed really online. And so when we got started, there was Thomas Wynn, and he came on as a contract editor and was like, hey, I want to volunteer. I want to help. And from him, we brought in others. We brought in Mia, Ebony, Darren, Joy, Joyce, the whole team, Jack as well. And the community kind of organically grew out of people wanting to write, and then wanting to help others write and help others, develop their skill set. And then the Discord kind of blossomed out of that, and just more people came on board and helping reading and writing. And I would say that since we started, at least since 2019, everything online also has these ebbs and flows. And, sometimes you'll say, okay, am I doing it right? Am I growing enough? Do I have the listenership? Do I have the audience? And the other thing too is people grow, people change. If you're following the same thing that you did 7, 8, 9 years ago, you change. You turn into a different person. But we still have some incredible people who've come on, and many of them said, I've never written anything before, or this was my first time doing any voice acting, but my friends always told me I should do it. And some really kick-ass talented individuals. And now I've seen like where they've gone off and where they've grown and what other new things they're doing. And that's just super exciting to say, hey, we were kind of there at a pivotal point, because one of our mandates is to say for all the volunteers that work together, and we just want to really help people tell a story that they've either never felt confident to. Again, maybe it's someone who starts in our fan fiction and then they move into originals, or maybe they're like, oh, I really want to do originals, but I'm afraid of submitting somewhere because maybe there's a submission limit, or maybe there's like a cost of submission, or some people are nervous of like, well, I want to write, but is it any good? Like, could I get paid? Maybe I need to like try something different. Where I really like what the editorial team and myself have done is that we really have different sort of niches in saying, what are we here to do? Like one of our editors exceptional at the world building, if that's the sort of story an author really wants to do. How do we do that in a remarkable way? But we challenge our authors as well. My background was in theater and the performing arts, so I put a lot more emphasis on character motivating story. And so it's to say, hey, okay, that's great. You love your world building, but that's not all we do. We need to make sure that a story is motivated by character, motivated by wants, obstacles, fears. I think fear is one central theme, even in my own writing, that kind of bleeds out into other authors. And that goes all, that's a rich tapestry to play with the team that we have.
Indeed. Well, speaking of fear, we are currently in the best season of the whole year as of recording, Spooktober.
Mm-hmm.
Colin, I know you're a connoisseur of Halloween-related media. Is there anything that's on your list this year to watch, or any stories that you want to experience? What have you got lined up?
Oh my gosh! Open up the letterbox and be like, what is on my to-do list, my agenda? I've actually really been in the last couple months. I've been enjoying a lot of a lot more foreign films and things like that. There are some films that I completely missed, when they came out, like the old Trick or Treat, 2007. I mean, at the time of this recording, the new Welcome to Derry HBO series has come out, and curious about that. But those are the big ticket ones. I mean, like there's independent stuff that I'm interested in as well. Things that I may have missed in the last while, like Dream Eater, or I know Stuckman has Shelby Oaks, Bone Lake. Not exactly international in those regards, but things like Under the Shadow, I believe. I think that's an Iranian film. Someone's going to listen and know and is going to hate me a whole lot. Tigers Are Not Afraid. A lot of Hispanic horror I'm also finding quite interesting. And for next week, my work is taking me down to Mexico City, and it does overlap with the season for the Day of the Dead. So hopefully I'll be able to check out a couple interesting things while I'm down there and report back the next time we chat.
Yeah, have a great time, man. I also love horror. I didn't used to when I was younger, but as I got older, I found that horror is such a unique genre because in our comfortable Western world lives, fear, true fear, is such a rare thing for us to actually experience. And so horror is so unique in that sense, where it gives us that taste of being afraid and having that emotion that we normally don't really experience. A lot of people have anxiety, and anxiety is really tough, don't get me wrong, but to have actual fear and terror is such a unique experience that really, for most of us, it's horror media that gives us that, and it's the only way that we get that, right?
Well, I mean, fear is not just for the horror genre. I think anything that is interesting to me as a person usually stems from a feeling of, and it comes into writing, is to say, is there a lack that we are trying to overcome? And the fear of that thing really provides a rich motive force in writing of the internal conflict versus the external. When we think of stories that are like, okay, I'll just throw like, character is going to go up against a giant, right? Okay. It's interesting. It's the David and Goliath, small versus large. You get those external, but fear when we start to do character studies, and we do this a lot in our writing as well, is to say, what is the character's primary goal? We start talking about fear as a way of saying, well, what reservations do they have? And it's not just fear of, I'm afraid of, I'm going to get, accidentally summon a demon, or I'm afraid of doing but it can be the fear of, I'm a fear of growing old. I'm afraid of being alone. I'm afraid of a mistake I made, and that I can't stop making those mistakes. And I think that fear is a incredibly powerful tool. When you're able to say what your character is afraid of, you will naturally find strong oppositional forces to make them confront that fear, as well as to say, what crutches do we use when we don't address fear? What things do we rely on to get around it? And it does make people very capable. I mean, whenever there's a horror movie and you watch a person, you're like, don't go into the basement because, it's stupid. And you're like yelling at your screen. But then you see something like the film Nope or Barbarian, where characters are incredibly self-aware, but they're still afraid. It does make their courage a lot more remarkable, because being afraid and still doing the thing endears us to people. We want to root for people. So if you're afraid of something and you are battling against it, whether that is a supernatural force on the outside, or maybe it's, facing a vice, a compulsion, a bad habit, an addiction, fear is a wonderful story writing tool to be able to get deeper into a character, what their main motivations and what they aspire to be.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You can absolutely have those characters going into dark, scary basements, but still have it completely make sense and relatable for their character. I always think about one of my favorite films, Silence of the Lambs, where right at the end of that film, spoiler alert, Clarice goes into that basement without calling for backup. And at first you're like, what are you doing, you crazy woman? But actually, it's been quite thoroughly established previously in the film that her biggest desire is advancement. It's to be seen as a competent woman working in the FBI. And so she goes into that basement not because she's an idiot, but because she's actually fulfilling what she wants to do. And she has to confront that fear in order to get what she wants. And yeah, you're totally right about writing fear into character writing, because I always grew up, when you make a good character, you make sure they have those wants and desires. But as soon as I started considering, what actually makes my characters afraid and what do they do to avoid those things, it just adds such a new dimension to writing. And I just remember my characters went from like 2 out of 10 to 6 out of 10 easy.
It is a wonderful thing that I think actually that horror writing to a degree, yes, but if you think about fear and you say, okay, I want to write romance, like it is such a strong tool to be able to understand, like afraid of intimacy, afraid of opening up to people. Like fear, at least in us as human beings, is always a protection method of saying, I shouldn't do the thing because there's going to be consequences. And as human beings, we are coded to look for problems and solve them. Or, more often than not, we find some people stick their heads in the sand, but that can also be a coping mechanism, right? But when it comes to at least reading the characters that I want to read, curiosity and fear are kind of the two components of each other, because the more you look, the more you can be interested, but then you get afraid. There is an example of this that I was just thinking about, because I watched Oz Perkins' The Black Coat's Daughter just a couple weeks ago. And I was one of the people that was like super excited for Longlegs, and I saw it in theaters and I was kind of disappointed. And I saw Black Coat's Daughter right after I saw Sinners, another incredible film. And again, if we're talking about great films coming out this year, I mean, let's be honest, Ryan Coogler, Oz Perkins, like, there's so many great directors that are doing things that aren't, traditional. They're pushing envelope. Horror very often isn't recognized. But when you see some of these films and you're like, is it a horror movie or is it a character study? Like I really thought of The Black Coat's Daughter as such a great investigation into grief and the fear of being alone. And I won't spoil for listeners who haven't seen it, but it's, the idea of having a demon that you connect with. But, is it there for you when you need it? And then Sinners, which you make the argument, is that a horror film? I mean, yes, but it's also a historical drama. And a lot of the fear in that comes out of fear of culture and fear of erasure and fear of isolation. And fear, you can pick each character. There's like, fear of not having your community. That, yes, you make spooky things and vampires that bump in the night, but even if you were to remove that and you just had these characters that are, hey, I want to play music, but I'm afraid I can't reconcile it with my father's, religion, or I'm, afraid of dying in squalor. And so I got to go make it big and make a name for myself. Like, it's a great thing that if for anyone who ever takes like a theater class or looks into the writing of Uta Hagen to say like, who am I? What are my circumstances? What are my desires? And kind of like you mentioned of like, what does my characters want? What does my characters need? What happens when I don't get what I want? But I would also start injecting, like what am I afraid of? Because all fear is, you're not born with fear. You don't enter this world instinctively afraid of complex social circumstance. You're afraid of a sound that makes you jump, but fear is learned and earned by our experience. So if you're going to say, well, why is a person afraid of that? It can really give you some great backstory and some great character development of, well, what happened to them when they were 10? What was it like? Were they left alone in a shopping cart for too long? And that created an issue when someone else came up and tried to take the cart. or their parent left them too long ago. Like it is a wonderful for tool. And I think the thing is, I never gave up on that. I was introduced to horror at a very young age. I mean, my first film that I remember scaring the pants off me was Poltergeist. And if we talk about directors who also understand the power of drama and horror, you look at anything that's come out of Amblin and those old childhood movies, but they also have tinges of horror. I mean, E.T., there are scary moments in it.
Yeah, what was that trend that happened like a decade ago where YouTubers were exploring childhood trauma or something like that? I have actually kind of a weird one when it comes to this, and this will probably be cut because it's kind of embarrassing, but also kind of funny. My childhood trauma growing up was Wallace and Gromit and stop motion animation in general. I just find that stop motion animation is incredibly impressive, but really, really uncanny. I just don't like things that are imitating human beings, but not quite there. And I remember Wallace and Gromit and the Curse of the Were-Rabbit was horrifying to me as well, just because of the body horror. It was my first ever time thinking like, oh man, this is horrible that somebody's being forced to change into something that they don't want to change into, even though it was in the medium of a cute, funny rabbit.
Stop motion animation, though, like it is such a, and I'm glad that there's still Leica, and a large studio that continues to do that. Because Coraline, another example of you watch that, it's a family film, but like I really love family entertainment that is also intended to scare the absolute shit out of children. Like there is a formative thing of like where we can, well, it's kind of like for me, it's like a theme park ride. Like you get on it, you're scared, but then you get off and you're all kind of better and bonded from the experience of like, hey, well, that was pretty crazy, right? Like, I would not, and again, there is a spectrum of that, right? Like Wallace and Gromit and Coraline. The opposite end of that would be Phil Tippett's Mad God, which came out in the last few years, last 3-4 years. Again, stop motion animation. For anyone listening who knows what this is, if you leave it enough comments, I will force John to watch this film. It is one of the most unsettling, uncanny things. I think it would be absolutely the right nightmare fuel for the spooky season.
Well, there you go, folks. Challenge accepted.
Yeah, there you go.
But anyway, you were talking earlier about Sinners and other recent things that you saw. I want to ask you, Colin, what is a recent piece of media that you've experienced recently for the first time that you would love to talk a little bit about? It doesn't have to be something that was released this year necessarily. It could have been released anytime. I'm just curious as to what you'd love to recommend to the listeners.
I mean, I was late on the bandwagon for seeing Weapons. I just saw that in the last week or two, and I thought it was exceptionally funny.
Right.
I thought that the dark humor in it was wild, and I was just grinning ear to ear the entire film because there's a lot of, put it this way, sometimes you want to go see art, and sometimes you want to go to be entertained, and I would say that I was very lucky where it gave me both. And another film that did that in the last few years was The Substance. Like I'm like, oh, I'm watching something really special. And there's your body horror connection there. But I'm watching something really special. And sometimes you watch that and that's a film that moves you to tears, right? And those exist and those are absolutely necessary. But sometimes you go and you're like, I just want to have a great time at the movies, or, read a good book. And there are some things that as I'm getting older, I wish I could experience for the first time, or watch someone experience for the first time. And I think that's why I've started to, late at night as I'm making a late dinner or something, have like a reaction channel off on the TV in the background. Like I am not a believer in second screen viewings and that whole trend of let's produce something that people can have because they're going to be stuck to their phone anyway. I believe that all art should be given at least a large degree of your attention when you are interacting with it, because calling art content therefore informs that it's something you consume just gives me a really icky feeling. Like I think that's
it's such a word that's just been taken over by the corporate machine and just feels so icky now.
And that's not to say that there's you can have your cheesy thing. You can like I love Love Is Blind and The Amazing Race and reality TV as well as the next one. The Traitors is got a firm stranglehold on me. But there's also in that just to say I want to learn something. I want to be engaged with something. And I think we're seeing also with the discussion of more people just getting off the internet, right? Like and dead internet theory and AI. And it's like, well, nothing's really made by people anymore. And you go out and you re-engage. I think that there's a bit of a symptom of that in what I'm talking about, of having someone's reaction. I don't have kids. But being able to say, oh man, growing up, I loved the Ray Bradbury, The Halloween Tree. I watched that every year. There's people who would say I'd watch, Nightmare Before Christmas, or, where Christmas comes around and you always have your specials. I can remember, like Jetsons and Flintstones usually had some sort of like off-brand, Halloween special or something like that, like Hanna-Barbera era. But gosh, going back to classics and sharing, and I'd be very curious, to your question of what's something you watched recently, but I would also ask a question, what's something that someone hasn't seen before that was foundational to you that you would love to see someone watch for the first time?
Oh, damn, that is such a good question. And I'm going to actually stall that one by answering my original question whilst I think of a good answer. But for me, a recent piece of media that I watched that I really enjoyed was actually The Iron Giant.
Oh, yeah.
It was a 90s animated film. It was Brad Bird's first film that really gave him a big break. And it is absolutely fantastic. It's such a shame. I think I was reading that the company, I can't remember which studio did it, but they really didn't throw behind as much marketing as they should have at the film, and it really suffered. It went straight to VHS. It's such a tragedy. I would heavily recommend everybody who wants a nice family film to watch The Iron Giant.
I love that about and The Iron Giant and Superman and all the resurgence of just good, wide-eyed, ethical, moral, but not moralizing, like just people who have a strong belief that kindness and empathy are values that we should aspire to. It's wonderful. But also I'm glad that you would have seen that at a young age. And because I'll be honest, animation is such a great gateway for people to get introduced to more complex themes, because I think that we know that cartoons are safe, right? But then you start to get a little bit older, and whether that's, to my demographic, for me, like one of the first adult, and I use quotation just because it's adult animation, but that doesn't mean it's adult, was 82's The Plague Dogs. Terrifying.
Yeah, oh my god, yeah, that film is horrifying.
Terrifying film.
I think this is something we both share, but we're both huge animal lovers, and that film is just so hard to watch as an animal lover.
Absolutely. Just the hand gestures I have of one of the scenes. But when you do that, you do also kind of take in, like, I'm watching something that I probably shouldn't right now. And there's a sort of feeling of taboo around that. But you then look at other things that, like, how else are you supposed to feed more complex emotions and feelings to kids at particular ages, right? Like, do you say, okay, it's PG-13, now let's watch PG-13 movies? I remember seeseeing Jurassic Park in a drive-through. In the scene where the T-Rex is coming through the top of the car, I'm in a car. Like, there's a terror, like that whole drive back. My parents were dead silent, and I'm just like, okay, so there's something to be said about, like, when do we grow and when do we age into media that's appropriate for us? Or do we all have that story of the one thing that we saw, whether it was animation or just a mature movie that we saw, from the stairwell, peeking through the bars as our parents watched it at a too young an age? Because I do think that also ties into things that tap into conscious concerns that we develop as adults and the ways that we think that the world works. To use The Plague Dogs as a reference, because we've both seen it, and for listeners who have not, really involves, involves dogs that have been experimented on, they escape. You would be hard pressed if you watch that at a young age to not grow up thinking, I should treat animals ethically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? It is a film that really bakes into the empathy for animals in this regard. But then you think about other things, like movies like a character is a mutant, or they have some sort of like weird sloppy face, and you think of things, and I think of people who did that would have been the Guillermo del Toros of the world, right? Like people who saw the monsters and they took a great sympathy for the monsters. So I back to Fear. I think the thing that ends up scaring you as a child fascinates you up until adulthood, and kind of leaves a mark in the way that you view the world or the way the world should be. That's my thesis, at least.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And to circle back to the question you asked a few minutes ago about the piece of media that I'd love to show somebody for the first time, I'm probably going to go with the rather cop-out answer of Neon Genesis Evangelion, and then, of course, the end of Evangelion film, which is one of my favorite films of all time. Watching that with somebody, and especially somebody who perhaps isn't that into anime, is, I mean, you know, the first half of the show, you're like, this is just a silly robot show with kids, right? But then there's a very dark turn that happens at about, I reckon, episode 15, 16. And then you slowly come to realize that this show really isn't about the robots at all. And it's about horrible psychological trauma. And then you finish the show, right, with somebody, and they have that very controversial ending. And the person's like, oh my gosh, that's so crazy. And then you whip out End of Evangelion, and you're like, wait, don't worry, the creator got bullied into making a follow-up film to make a better ending. And they're like, oh yeah, that's great, you know, we can have a better ending. Then you show them End of Evangelion, and it's just even more batshit insane. And watching people's reaction towards the end of the film is just priceless.
I love that answer, but it also shows like how, because you'd think of Evangelion now and go, well, it's on classics list, right? And you go, ooh, what's the barrier to entry? And then you wind up with remakes and things that like, do they lose the spirit, or do they successfully adapt to a new era, new audience? And that goes for any medium, right? Like I think that the Universal movie monsters are a wonderful indication of something that kind of gets rebooted every 10 years and adequately reflects the fears of the time. I mean, if you go back and you look at, now that said, are they always a success? No. You know, you may get the Wolfman, Lee Whannell's film that just came out in the last few years and go, ooh, that's not really my Wolfman, but there's still value to be had in what was being attempted. But then he also does The Invisible Man. By all accounts, is a wonderful retelling of science and possession and, you know, the idea of being stalked and that what power that has. So I kind of stop and I'm like, okay, well, what things successfully deserve a reboot? Because we like to say, oh, the book was better than the movie. Oh, the old movie was better. But my God, like the Brendan Fraser, Rachel Weisz, The Mummy.
Yes, so good.
Is much better than its originator, right? So you sometimes you strike fire, and two of my favorite movies of all time are Back to the Future and Little Shop of Horrors.
Yeah.
And
Little Shop of Horrors is so good.
Again, you know, both of those, what's the fear in the characters and as creating strong motivations, but like, what would those look like if there was a new retelling of Back to the Future? Like, is the story good at its core, strong enough to be able to say, yeah, I could see that done well. Like always aim for like, what's the best way? Because I think that also opens up the idea for people to start to say, I can do my version. And that's where fan fiction becomes a wonderful tool to, you know, to bring it back to say, I would like to do my version of X character or of X faction or of X franchise. And then that leads the way to saying, well, I have my own vampire story. I have my own Western. You need to be able to not feel precious that, oh, someone's done it better or someone's done the text. You know, no one's ever going to write like you, who you are. And you're not even going to write like yourself as you would in 5-10 years.
Absolutely.
Whether that's based on experience or continued work. So just give it a try and see what comes out. You might hate it. In fact, you probably will.
Yeah.
No one likes everything that they put out. But also finding a community around you to rally and go, hey, you got something really unique here. And building that up is kind of the important thing about storytelling. It's why, you know, human beings, we're born and we have this incredible ability to listen and speak and have words and create language. Yeah, we didn't really put pencil to paper and create the written language for quite some time in our evolutionary history. But we have this great way of, let's just talk to each other and tell stories, because that's the way we make sense of the world. And what a better way of saying, okay, well, maybe that's how I'll get to be a better storyteller. I'll just start, talking about these ideas with people, and to the listener listening to this podcast, like, what are you thinking about? What is the story that you would want to tell, or what's a movie you're like, actually, I would really love if that was redone, because things change, the world changes.
Yeah, and neither of us are the first ones to ever say this, but when you first start out, you will copy and you'll imitate and you'll draw heavily from the things that inspire you, and that is absolutely fine. You'll get to the point where you'll write one story and you're like, oh my god, I just totally ripped off Frankenstein. You'll write another one and you'll be like, oh, I just wrote a Joe Abercrombie lookalike. But then, when you've written quite a few stories, you get up to the point where you have so many influences that they all get mashed together, and then that is what becomes your voice.
Yeah, in a way that's completely unique to you.
Yeah, and then it'll get to the point where you'll write a story and people will ask you, oh my goodness, this was such a original, unique idea that you had for this. And you kind of have to say in your head, well, no, actually, I took this element from this story and I stole this from this and I imitated this. But that doesn't matter, because if you ask any amazing writer or storyteller, they will say exactly the same thing. No one starts out with these incredible, unique, world-bending storytelling ideas in their head. It's just such a long lineage, as you said, of human history that has led us up to this point where we're telling these stories. That's the joy of it, right? That's the joy of art and storytelling, which is perhaps a little bit more fulfilling than sports. I know neither of us are massive sports guys, but, when you play a game like soccer, you score a goal, and that's super awesome. But at the end of the day, it is a goal the same way that 1,000, a million other people have played football and scored goals in that way. Whereas storytelling is just so unique. And even when we have these rebrands and refreshers of familiar stories, there's always that unique voice that is specific to the person telling it.
I am going to challenge a question then.
Okay.
What is your opinion? Because you did bring up Evangelion. What is your opinion on major or baseball anime or sports anime generally?
Yeah, having said what I just said, sports anime is super freaking good, and just sports storytelling in general. One of my favorite films is Coach Carter. I know it's not exactly the most historically accurate depiction of what actually happened, but I just love that sense of camaraderie and that sense of a team coming together, and you really get that kind of fist punching moment when the team does well. And it's so interesting because it's the same as you might get from an epic action movie or something.
It is. But so for someone in the arts though, you can go, okay, Angels in the Outfield. It's a story about like connecting to someone who's lost, but you're doing it through the medium of sports. Or, I mean, at the time of us having this conversation, the Blue Jays are playing against the Dodgers. And I'm like,
indeed.
Sorry, listeners, gotta go. But what if you could distill that into a small, like, just the rush of everyone around you? I mean, this is something to say of like being surrounded by everyone who's giving all of their attention onto something. There is an energy, and I don't know if you want to call it like spiritual or whatever, but when you have a group of people and they're all behind something, whether it's sports, whether it's a protest, whether it's a marathon, there is power to people being, surrounded by other people. Again, like if you know the story of like, okay, so this person had to go through this adversity and, they didn't have their parents and now they're part of a major sports league team, or you're a player from another country and you don't speak a lot of English, but you found connection with this team. That's a story into itself. But I think the same way that someone looks at a sport and say, oh, well, how do I play sports ball?
Relatable.
Could also be very similar to someone saying, what's with the light swords?
Yeah.
What's the Star Wars? Like, I think you do have to continue to look for influences in everything, not just in media, but the culture that bears it. And this is where I did my studies and my education was in international intercultural communications, and to say, there are moments in time that a culture can bear something out that is so unique to it in that moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like when we saw the war films that came out of World War II, right? Like the idea of heroism and courage and rushing up the beaches of Normandy, and wow, what a caliber of the greatest generation. And then you get to something like Jarhead, Jake Gyllenhaal, and films of the Gulf War, and you're just like, why are we here? And like that comes out of the Vietnam War, and again, it's stories like the soldier fighting the war that they felt I should not have to be
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
You know, generationally, every decade has a conflict where it's like, I wish I didn't have to be the person fighting, but something bore me here that I have to do it, and it changes every 10 years. Why not? Like, where are the other cyclical natures of storytelling? Like, you know, you've got your Frankenstein every 10 years. You've got your rags to riches story in sports. You've got your underdog sports team, right? Like there is a rhythmic nature of, we keep coming back to the same rhythm in 10-year increments and in 100-year increments, that we're not that dissimilar from our great grandparents and the stories that they would have liked to tell. Yeah, maybe the context is different, but I think the morals of how we would talk about ourselves are very similar. Go back and watch old black and white films and be absolutely horrified at some of the biases that exist. Like, oh, there's a lot of people spanking their wives at this time for discipline. What the hell? But then you go and you watch something like, was it Marriage Story, Wedding Story?
Yeah, Marriage Story.
Yeah, and you go, okay, well, how do we treat each other? How do we control each other? Again, to just be a scholar of different forms of life and art and meaning, and try to then transform that into, well, what do I want to say about that? Because yes, there's a rhythmic nature, but the influences, like you said, you through your lived experience are collecting different pieces of stories, different moments, different memories that are so uniquely yours. You're going to be able to tell something that's much different. And as you grow older, it's just going to increase.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd also say, even if you feel like, oh, I really want to write about this topic or theme, but I don't have anything to say about it, or nothing really intelligent to say about it, then that's okay. That's actually a really interesting thing to write about. You know, there are so many people who feel as though they are experts on a topic and will tout all this intellectual stuff about a certain issue or a certain theme, but being somebody who actually doesn't have the answers and is like, I'm living in this world, I'm having to deal with these complex problems, but I don't have the answers, that's a story. Write about a character who is living with moral complexity and doesn't know how to resolve it.
One of the most damaging pieces of feedback I ever received as a writer was, write what you know.
Yeah, I know that one.
Because I think that stunts a lot of creativity, and it limits, you know, where your imagination could go. Write about what you don't know. If you just saw K-pop Demon Hunters and you want to write about Korean demon folklore culture, just try to absorb as much as you can. And try to write. I do agree that there is something to be said about, okay, surround yourself with those influences, those little moats, you know, get those influences attached. But there's also a few things quite as powerful as someone who's very apt at going, okay, so that's the trope, that's the motif. Cool, I'll do my own take on it. Because then you get some stuff that bends genre and breaks rules and really stands out. When I first started writing it, one of the things that influenced me wasn't a particular movie or story or book. I went on to TV Tropes, the website that just collates all of them. I'm like, that's a cool trope. And then I just start writing something in that vein, and then just start breaking it. And not knowing what the rules are just as powerful as having that accumulation of experience.
That is such a great point to end on. We have had such a fantastic conversation here, Colin. I just want to spend the last 2 minutes, though, going back to Cold Open Stories. I'm hoping that this little podcast might inspire some listeners to submit to Cold Open. I believe you do a couple of major releases per year.
We do. So yeah, what we've done is this year we put a lot more emphasis onto our publishing house side of things over the podcast. But next year we are back with a lot more stuff. So we are accepting voice acting submissions. So if you ever want to voice for an audiobook or an audio drama, feel free, head on over to coldopenstories.com to do that. For our original worlds, we are always running a open call for submissions, usually about 2 or 3 times a year for our short story manuscripts. Do not worry about having everything, crossed every T, dotted every I. We want to help you grow and tell the story you want to. So feel free, submit. We have some great stuff on there that explains the types of stories, about our house style and accepted genres. And then if you're into more of fan fiction and Warhammer 40,000, we have quarterly fast fiction writing competitions, and we do an annual anthology project as well.
Cool. And if there was one piece of advice that you could give to budding writers submitting to Cold Open, what would it be?
make sure that it's more about character than the world building. We will help you find and chart a path for them, but we really want to make sure that these feel like real people, and that whether that means it's someone that you're like, oh, I really can't trust that person, or maybe I want to have a beer with them, but just
absolutely.
focus on like what makes this person rounded, what's their gray areas, what do they love, what do they fear. Bring a strong voice of a character will help make sure the rest of it follows.
Colyn, my good man, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolutely fantastic conversation, and I'm sure there are going to be people listening to this who will have gotten something at least vaguely interesting out of this. And yeah, please, everybody go check out coldopenstories.com. Watch out for the next round of submissions, whether that is fan fiction or for original worlds. And good luck to everybody hoping to submit. Thank you again so much, Colyn.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks to all the listeners. And yeah, hopefully be back to chat again soon.
See you later, everybody.